Welcome to the Samson Strength Coach Collective. On today's episode, we have Merv Lumba. I originally met Merv a long time ago over at Temple University. We both worked for Campus Rec at the time. Uh, and then obviously he's gone on and had a great career since. It was really cool for me because I think I was a couple classes above Merv. And so to graduate and then watch him go and be successful in strength and conditioning was awesome. A lot of people from Temple don't end up being strength coaches. A lot of people don't end up being strength coaches in general. So it was really cool for me to see him, be successful, and obviously know that he's a great person and deserves that success. And then, to speak with him today about how he was able to continue on at UMass Lowell and kind of advance in his positions. His yoga practice. The importance of mentors. We really cover a lot of different topics today, but it was great to catch up with Merv, somebody who I haven't spoken with in a while, and I'm glad to be able to introduce him to you, the listener. As always, I hope you enjoy and thank you for listening. Awesome. All right. Ready?
Yep.
What's going on, Samson Strength Coach Collective listeners? On today's episode, we have Merv Lumba. Merv and I met a long time ago. Our roots are in campus recreation. Okay. So it was actually somebody who went to Temple University with me, and then we got along well, obviously at campus rec, but then it's cool to find out that he ended up becoming a strength and conditioning coach. And then not only that, but is also crushing it over at UMass Lowell. So I'm excited to kind of catch up with you again, Merv, and then let the listeners in on what you're doing.
Well, I appreciate you having me on. And I appreciate all the time that you're able to dedicate towards me. So super excited. And
Absolutely.
my first podcast ever. So
Well, you're going to crush it. I already know this, and I actually was going to tell the listeners a story because this was kind of the first time that I was like, all right, this is a good dude, right? So we were at Campus Rec, both working on a specific shift, and then I remember it was snowing for like 2 days straight. You had on I think it was one of the days you ended up like the train wasn't running and you weren't able to come in, but then on one of the other days, it was like you walked through hellfire to get there and end up going into campus rec, and it was just you and me, and like even our supervisor was like, we can't make it in, so after that happened, I was like, I remember Merv's a good dude, he's dedicated to his work, and that's how I knew we'd get along.
yeah, I mean, I held that campus rec job in such high regard. That was like, shout out Anthony,
The boy.
the boy. I held that position in such high regard that like I even stayed one summer just working those staff shifts
Yeah.
for the very minimum so that like I could become a soup. Like that was a super
Yep.
big thing for me. So like yeah, I almost forgot about that. That was probably what, like 18, 19? Like
Yeah, that was
um
that was a little bit ago, yeah. But, I mean, ultimately, the best job to have in undergrad, I thought. It was sick,
oh,
literally just watch people lift weights. Somebody called it a bomb threat one time, that was probably the only thing I ever had to deal with,
yeah.
but super easy. There was no bomb, so that always helps out in obviously dealing with the threat.
Yeah.
But, yeah, so I remember that's where we ended up first meeting. I remember I was thinking you were a great dude, and then, obviously, you've seen some success, so I'm excited to kinda get into it.
Yeah.
Can you just kind of give us your background in strength and conditioning? What interested you in the field, and then what's brought you to UMass Lowell?
Yeah, so I started at Temple University. I was a exercise science but pre-physical therapy major at the time. So my track had guided me along the way towards physical therapy. And then I was like 100% dialed in. I was like, I'm going to PC school, like I'm applying all that. And then there was 1 year in the summer where I had literally spent the whole summer shadowing at physical therapy clinics, like 5 days a week, two different clinics, spending 5 to 6 hours at a day at a clip, like at these facilities. At the end of the summer, I had accumulated 130 hours, like something crazy like that, and unpaid. And I was like, I had that moment where I was like, I don't want to do this. Like, this is really slow, and I can only watch somebody like pick up marbles with their feet, like so so long, like or spend so much time with somebody with a heat pad. I was like, I need a little bit more. So I
Mm.
went in, spoke with my advisor about like changing my track a little bit, and so she forwarded me to the director, Dr. Anthony Skurza, who put me on to strength and conditioning. That year, I did my first uh, collegiate strength and conditioning internship at the University of Pennsylvania. At the time, it was Coach Stephen Brindle, Michelle Pfeiffer, and Corey Waltz. And I owe a lot to them kind of taking a chance on me over there at UPenn. So I did that internship there. Moving forward, Dr. Skurza provided, he like sent some email. He would send out emails so super often about different graduate assistant opportunities, which is how Merrimack College came up. So Merrimack College has a 1 year graduate fellowship program. And so they pay for half your tuition to do um, pretty much classes at Merrimack, but your practical work is at a different site, right? And so it's um, like a lot of schools are associated with I believe like Holy Cross, BC, like all these different schools. UMass Lowell, obviously, like Mike Boyles, all of them get these assistants from the Merrimack graduate program, but you take classes there. So as a graduate fellow, you go there, it's interview day. Um, and I describe interview day as like speed dating for graduate assistants. It's like you go to an auditorium at Merrimack and you interview with all these people for half an hour, and then like they rate you, you rate them, and then in a couple of months you figure out where you are. And funny enough, UMass Lowell was the last interview of my day. I'm exhausted, don't really know anything about UMass Lowell, and then go from graduate assistant at UMass Lowell, part time at UMass Lowell the following year after that, now I'm full time at UMass Lowell.
Dude, that's awesome. And that actually answers a question I've always kind of had in the back of my head, right? Because we had a position open up at App State recently, and the amount of Merrimack grads, I was like, I can't believe how many people are coming from Merrimack. I remember that you went there, but they all had the different graduate assistantships, right? They're all at different locations. So I was curious, and then now I understand exactly how that process actually occurred. Were you able to kind of keep in contact with the other GAs through Merrimack? And so you went to class with them and then went off and did your stuff at UMass Lowell?
Yeah, yeah.
Okay.
So like my network from that graduate class, it's so cool. Like a lot of us are doing a lot of different things, and I think they do a good job of providing a lot of different strength and conditioning opportunities and not just college, right? So like there are a lot of elite training facilities up in Massachusetts. And so like now the people that I went to grad school with, like yes, some of them are in college. Like one of my friends is working with Iowa football right now, right? And like we didn't do our fellowship together, but he's like over there. But then there's a lot of people like who are at local facilities. And so whenever like our part-time job is open, I reach out to her and I'm like, hey, do you have any good grad fellows kind of in the pipeline, like who are looking for employment opportunities? And because it's like 30 minutes away, it's like way easier for somebody to be able to make that jump. So like, I still keep in touch with a lot of the people that I had class with, the people that I'm really close with, and like the program attracts a lot of people. Like there's people who are like, well, I'll say like non-traditional master's students who like come back to school. They're like 30, like mid 30s, like late 20s, and like they have a lot of experience going into this program, like a lot of practical experience. But they came back to Merrimack, and I think it just speaks to the professors. Like so those, like my capstone presentation, I had like Dr. Kramer on my capstone presentation, like because he's connected to the program through one of the professors. So he came in and kind of did some like guest lecturing. So to be able to hear from the guy who wrote your textbook,
Yeah.
like that's pretty special. You know what I mean? So
Well, that's awesome. And I guess I'm not super familiar with that model, right? Because I feel like usually it's just you apply for the GA position and then they pick you and then you go straight to their grad school. I think that model to me makes sense, honestly. And I think did you enjoy that actual experience and that the way that broke down? And then do you think it should be kind of applied more throughout the United States?
Like the 1 year model versus the two.
Well, 1 year, but then also kind of this matching where, you go to school at Merrimack, but then complete your work at UMass Lowell.
I think it works because of the density of the schools that we have in this area.
Okay.
Because all these schools are within 30 to 40 minutes of Merrimack College. And so, like, from Merrimack, again, there's BC, Northeastern, Holy Cross. Like, there's also D2 schools like St. Anselm. Like, there's a lot of opportunity, and like with the private facilities too. I think I always caution people whenever they're making an investment into like the next step of their career. Like, I think it's definitely worth weighing the pros and cons, right? Because I think you become a better coach and more dialed in in a 2 year program. But the program is way more accelerated in 1 year. So like a lot of the learning moments or even program install, right? Like if you have a program that you have a team, you install the program, like how do you like know that it's effective until like you see it like long term, right?
Mhm.
So like I think that's the pro of having a 2 year program versus a one. But I think like because of Merrimack College and the practitioners there, it made it such an elite experience on my end, you know.
Mhm. I like that piece, and I remember my second year of grad school being very much ready to be done. So I
Yeah.
think 1 year may have been better for me because I just have the attention span of a goldfish. But I mean, that's just kind of fits me a little bit better. One thing that I was curious about, and I really want to talk to you about on the podcast because I think it can help our other listeners is you've obviously done a great job at UMass Lowell, but going from GA to part time, I think is always a great compliment, right? Because it means they like you and they want to keep you around. But then to be brought on as a full time staff member as well, like I think that really reflects on the quality of work that you provide. What are some things that you think that you've done that have kind of allowed you to make those jumps within the same athletic department?
You know, I will say I think there's a lot of different factors that go into play. Something that I remember when I was an intern coming up, uh, one of the pieces of advice that I had gotten was make Hollywood where you're at, right?
Mm,
Um, and so for me, I had always focused on just doing a really, really good job wherever I was at different phases of my career, right? So like, I always had treated the athletes with like the utmost respect, made sure that like when I'm with them, like I'm completely present. And so I think that in itself, like, even when I was part time, I had never treated it like part time hours. You know what I mean? Like for better or worse, like wherever that is, like um, I always treated it as if it was like a full time opportunity, right? When I was a GA, when I was a part timer, and then it turned into a full time gig. So I had always kind of treated it as if it was full time. And so first and foremost, I think like make Hollywood where you're at, like, and just put a lot of work into the program and do what is asked of you. So first and foremost. Second, I found really good mentors along the way. Um, the the mentor that I held, I think, in highest regard was Keith Fincy. He was the assistant director for sports performance, and he's the one who like had brought me into this program. And I think coming up, I was super super focused on becoming a better technical strength coach. And I think this is important, right? Like a lot of um, I don't want it to get overlooked. I was really focused on becoming a better X's and O's technical coach. Like I wanted my programs to be super, super good. And I wanted all these skills associated with strength and conditioning to get better. And then this is the person that always like looked at me as if I was, human first versus just like a GA coach or whatever. Right. And he was always, always about the people and his relationships with people and how he carried himself around other people is why I carry myself the way I do. It was such a big change for me because like it like snaps and it's like you're way bigger than your profession. You're way bigger than your career, right? Like there's so much more. Um, I talked way less, even though he was one of my closest mentors. I barely talked about X's and O's with him, like barely. It was always about like the relationships that I had with other people, and how I was doing and my mental health, like all those things that he cared about a lot. So like from a mentorship standpoint, he's the reason why I am where I am right now. In addition to like a lot of other coaches who have helped me along the way, but I do want to like make sure that I make that note because I think he was such a special human and everybody who interacted with him like knew like, all right, like he's just good people. Um, and so, his investment into me as a person bled into my coaching and bled into like how just I carried myself. And so I will say like find good mentorship, to help you rise the ranks, right? And his coaching tree is super deep, so I still have like pieces of him along the way. You know what I mean? But like for me, like finding good, or for everybody, right? Like if you're young, like finding good mentors is a um, super big deal, right? Um, and then the last part of climbing the ranks is, for me, is like being really patient, right? And that's kind of where like having a mentor is helpful, right? Don't get me wrong, like warm and fuzzies don't pay your bills. I've learned that, I've learned that the hard way. Warm and fuzzies don't pay your bills. But I think something that I've even seen, like I'm a young strength coach, right? But there's even younger strength coaches who want to make a huge jump, like right from when they're a graduate assistant, and like they're not as refined yet. And so if you hop from place to place to place, it's like you don't get to develop the interpersonal relationships that allow you to showcase your technical ability. Like for me, like I care a lot and I aim to be a really precise high level coach because like I care. You know what I mean? Like that's where it comes from. Like it comes from a place of like, I want the best for you. Right. So like a lot of people like bounce from place to place to place. I don't get paid. Like I get it. Like pay is a big deal in our industry, right? Like, you have a master's degree. Like I get it. I get it. But like, I just encourage a lot of people to be patient and let the good grow when you're patient, right? Like I think that's a big thing that I've been seeing very often. And like, if you have a toxic situation, like you gotta get out of it, right?
Yeah.
But I think like, what are your core values? I think that goes a long way into like, all right, like I can continue to grow here professionally, personally, all that. So a lot of different, again, long-winded answer on my end,
No, it's
but
great.
like I think a lot of a lot of those factors kind of play a role into kind of where I am right now.
Well, absolutely. I think it's always multifactorial, right? For somebody to be able to progress, especially within the same school, I think there's a lot of things that go into it, right? And ultimately, I love the patience aspect because I agree. I think there's a lot of it's like almost like JG Wentworth. It's like it's my money and I need it now, right? It's all these people, which I completely understand. And the number one advice you're going to get on salary is that if you don't like your salary, go to a different job, right? Because it's going to be hard to get a raise. But ultimately, I think sometimes it can be overlooked of what your situation actually is, and do you enjoy your situation, right? Because for me, yeah, I think I'd like to get paid more. I'm sure you'd like to get paid more. I think everybody in the world would not turn down a raise, right? But ultimately, this is a really good situation for me. I mean, I work with my fiance. My parents are 2 hours away. Like, this is going to be pretty hard to beat. Now, I don't want my admin to listen to this, right? Because then you don't want to hurt the raise chances. But ultimately, I try not to get caught up in the thoughts of okay, well, where would it be, or what would my situation be elsewhere, right? Or what would it look like elsewhere? Because I think this is a really good situation for me, so I don't want to overlook it and kind of just look at the small things that might, not be the best. And I
Yeah,
think it
and
makes a
like
difference.
and like that's where having really good mentors comes into play, right? Because like I think early on I was having a lot of these conversations like in my own head, right? Like, and so I would ask some of the I'm lucky here that I have really close relationships with my sport coaches too, who have been doing this for a long time, right? And so I'm able to have really transparent conversations like, hey, I got this call from so and so, like, should I entertain it? And like she's always like very transparent. She was like, I'm biased because I love you as a person, I love you as a coach, I love you for our program, but like if it's a really good opportunity, like you gotta go. So and I get that that's like kind of a unicorn situation. Like you told your sport coach, hey, I got the call. They're like, well, stay put. What are you doing? Like,
Yeah.
but even having other mentors who are like, I did think like, I made the jump professionally, and then I was like, I got treated horribly. So it's like you have to figure out what your non-negotiables, your core values as a strength coach super early on, and what do you value out of your quality of life, like, um, and like speaking to your point, right, like that's an awesome situation.
Yeah.
You're close to home, like you work with your fiance, like you're close to family, right? Like that's awesome. Like I'm so happy for you.
Thank you. You
Yeah.
know, I guess a big piece too is always going to be the relationships that you build at each spot. I think those really kind of help define your core values as well. But then also just understand, are your values in alignment with everybody else who's here at this specific situation or specific school, whatever it may be for whoever's listening. One thing that, and for whoever is listening, I want you to understand too, everybody loves Merv. Like anybody, you campus rec, anytime that we spoke with them, everybody's like, yeah, Merv's the man. Merv's awesome. And then obviously you've seen that kind of continue with where you're at currently. What goes into that relationship building aspect for you? Because some coaches do struggle with it, and so I think that's one of your, super talents. So I'm just curious, is there an intentionality behind it, or is this kind of just being Merv?
Well, I appreciate that. I appreciate that compliment. But I was talking to one of my mentors at this past CSUCA, and she said one of the things that you always did really well as an intern, and it made you good, is that you listened.
Mm.
Um, and so I think on my end, I always aim to listen. And a lot of the things that I'm trying to look for and evaluate for, and like what my intentions are, kind of like I know how to navigate situations a lot more because I listen first, kind of see where they're at, and then meet the person where they're at. You know what I mean?
Hmm.
Um, and so I think that's something that I do really well. And like sometimes people don't need to be like sometimes people like will seek out advice, but they oftentimes will just like need somebody to listen to them, right? Like more times than not. And so I feel like that in itself is like a super important skill, and not like listen selfishly, and like I'm waiting for you to be done talking so that
Hmm.
I can talk, right? Like that's different. Um, and if to some extent like you can't relate to what they're talking about, like you just let them know and be transparent, right? Like I think listening and being your most authentic self all the time, like that's how I was raised. Like that's how my mom and my sisters and my father raised me. Like just be authentic and like can't go wrong,
Yeah.
essentially. And so I think those are the two things that I think, regardless of my technical ability, I'm always going to aim to be authentic in my interactions, be thoughtful, um, and listen, right?
My fiance is somewhere out there clapping right now, right? Because it's so hard for me to turn off the coaching aspect. That's by far what my Achilles heel is when somebody comes to me and obviously they just want to talk to somebody. Like I think it's how it's because how I was raised, right? And those things always are all, interconnected. But I feel like I have to help them with their problem, no matter what, and they know their solution. And I'm really doing is kind of muddying the waters a little bit by giving them a different perspective and making them kind of second guess what their own solution was going to be. uh, and so that's been a huge personal growth, especially at the Agnew household. I had to learn how to turn coaching off and just lend a listening ear, and it makes the world of difference. And I really have noticed that, once I apply it to coaching itself, uh, it really deepens the relationships that I have with people. It helps me understand them much better.
Yeah, I could not agree more. Like I think it's, I mean, without the athletes and the dialogue that I have with my athletes, like I'm not a coach.
Yeah.
Like I didn't, I didn't get into this because I just like hearing myself speak. You know what I mean? Like I like lifting weights. Like I got into it because of that, right? And I was a mediocre athlete who got better by lifting weights. Like I don't know what percentage of strength coaches that encompasses, but
99. Yeah.
but yeah, like I got into it for other people. Like I knew I wanted to help people, but like this is the conduit in which I'm doing it right now.
Yeah. No, it makes a difference, seriously, when you can actually have that piece of your job that you really feel fulfilled in too. And it's like, you're doing what you're meant to be doing. Um, One thing for our listeners as well too that they may not be aware of is Merv is the ultimate yogi. He was would run some yoga classes for us at Campus Rec, but then obviously kind of brought that into his practice as a strength coach. How has that influenced your coaching?
Yeah, I think so. I think this is something that benefits from some kind of context.
Yeah.
Okay. So I started doing yoga when I was 18. Um, and I just really, really liked a couple of teachers, like, and like the way I felt like after these sessions. And I was like super, super busy as a freshman. Like I probably had to be the most busy freshman in the world. Like I had all these jobs on campus and I was taking like 18 credits as a freshman, which is like the max you can do. And I had like 8 a.m. It's like nightmare lineup, right? Uh, but I always made time to go to yoga, and like this was a non-negotiable in my day. And for me, like outside of the physical benefits, I always, from a mental health standpoint, felt like I was pouring more into myself because I made the time for myself, even though I'm super busy. Like I made the time for yoga, and so I started working at the gym, and then eventually started to, like, because I was a regular, I was interested in becoming a teacher because I wanted to bring that same kind of like mental relief to the people that I was teaching at the time, right? So like, if I could help somebody feel some level of like mental relief and like they're super dialed in to like this session and they don't think of anything else, like then I did a good job, right? And so very early on, like I was just a sub for a lot of classes. And so I'd be like, hey, welcome to Yoga with Bridget. I'm not Bridget. I'm Merv. And so there was one time I like finally got my own class and I was like, hey, welcome to Yoga with Merv. My name is Merv. And so like every single class that I teach, like from here on out, like I always start, hey, welcome to Yoga with Merv. My name is Merv. And like people who there were people at Temple who took my classes for like 3 years.
Yeah.
Like, and they hear it like every single time. Like, and it's funny because they always like, they know me from Instagram still. And like, they're like, man, I really miss yoga with Merv. Like, they always refer it to like, not like, I miss your yoga sessions. It's like, man, I miss yoga with Merv. Like, it's a whole thing. And so like kind of bridging the gap into my coaching, um, I look at it less from like I'm becoming a better like technical. It's not like as much of a, yes, obviously like the physical skill set of being able to teach a really effective yoga class is helpful, and it's important. Uh, but I find that the relief that my athletes get from whenever I do yoga with them is always from like a mental health standpoint, right? Because our athletes there's so much that are asked of them every single day, right? From professors, from coaches, from me, like a lot of moving parts, and it's go, 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 go from like, the second you wake up to the second like you're going to bed. And like at UMass Lowell, like we have some kids who are like biomedical engineer majors, right? Like nursing majors, like pretty hard science, like majors like, who are up till like 1 or 2 a.m. like dialed in. And so whenever I can bring some kind of like mental health relief through, hey, like the next 45 minutes, next hour, like you are the priority, right? Like you don't have to serve anybody else but yourself right now. Like the goal of today, of right now, is to pour back into you. And so, we go through like I have a basic like flow that I try to talk through, and I talk in a way that like I occupy literally like 45 straight minutes, right? And when you're focused on listening to me go through the yoga, it's like you might lay down at the end and you're like, wow, I didn't think about anything else, right? And so that kind of relief is the thing that keeps me active in doing what I do. It's like this is the tool that like helps relieve the pressure nozzle a little bit. And there was super like busy lives. So like I think for me it's always been like more mental health, like because I always look at my athletes as like people first and not just like you're an athlete here, right? I care about them as people, and so if the mental health of our athletes are not good, then like obviously it impacts performance and all that. But like, there's a lot going on between 18 and 22, and so like if I could positively impact that by introducing yoga with Merv, right? Like, then that's a net positive, I hope.
Well, that's a skill that you're working on with them as well, right? The actual being where your feet are, or your undivided focus. Training them to be able to focus on something is a massive help. First of all, exactly like you mentioned, from the mental health standpoint, right? I mean, that's what I tell recruits all the time when they come in. I'm like, you're gonna, dude, like first year you're gonna make a lot of gains, but like ultimately it's freshman to sophomore summer that's you're gonna be kind of your best piece, because your freshman year is first of all figuring out, I still want to be with my girlfriend that I was with in high school. Am I taking 18 credits like Merv was? Where's the dining hall? I just had my first beer. Like those things really kind of affect you. And then you're also playing collegiate sport. So ultimately, it is the nonstop demand of your attention and getting pulled in a million different directions. So to give them that break is crucial, and something where I wouldn't understand that at 18. I would need somebody to help me understand that piece, right? I wouldn't just be like, gee, I really not necessarily like you did by yourself, right? But I'm a little bit dumber. I had to take my time to figure that out. That I needed to have a practice that allowed me to have a single focus for a period of time. But then also from a sports skill standpoint, think about practices now for people who have that skill, who can focus their undivided attention on just a practice or just a lift or whatever they're doing throughout the rest of their life. Those moments are going to be higher quality. They're going to get much more out of them because that's where their individual attention is actually focused on as well. So I think it's great from a mental relief standpoint, but also from a mental skills. That's a big benefit for them.
And I don't know if you, to your point, like I don't know if you see this as often in your population too, but I find that even the people who are coming in who are younger, like our true freshmen, like their attention spans are like
Awful.
awful.
Yeah.
Like I start a sentence and somebody's like, I was like, hey, I'm right here, like, and so I think a lot of that kind of goes to like the generation of like COVID, that like we're literally seeing like the aftermath of COVID from a social like standpoint right now. It's like who is how much can you focus for like the next like couple moments, like, and that's something that I find like I'm trying to always get better at, like teach things in a way that there's multiple layers, right? And I check in and I'm like, hey, does everybody get this? Like I'm showing you visually, I'm explaining it, and then you do it, and then I give you feedback. It's like I always try to layer in the way that like we're doing learning, especially for this younger group. And I'm purposely repetitive. Like a while, like I hated repeating myself, but I've just kind of accepted that I have to like repeat myself at this point. Like, yes, write your weights on your card. Like, what are the reps? It's like the card is right there. Like,
Yeah, I've got one player in particular. I love him to death. Like he's one of my favorite guys. But every single time we'll go sets and reps. I'll say him out. They'll be on the card. And then I'll even ask him specifically, I'm like, hey, Miles, make sure you're paying attention, right? And then as soon as we finish up, I'll see him do the reps. And then he'll like, I've seen him a couple times too, like look around and kind of track how many other reps while, during his own lift. He's just sitting there paused, like, waiting. I'm like, come on, Miles, like you got to lock in on this, right? But what's been interesting about that aspect, and I don't know if you've seen the same thing. I've definitely noticed the shorter attention spans, but from a standpoint of freshmen coming in with a team and being able to integrate themselves with the team, I've seen that skill kind of lessen. I think because of that, culture standpoint, and that because they're more like the other freshmen that are around. Now, I understand when you come in, you're obviously going to be closer with the freshmen, right? You're not going to go up to the seniors and be like, "Hey, what's up, guys?" and then roll with them. But from a team standpoint, that is kind of what the goal is. And so I've noticed though that the freshmen always have now just stick together, and it's almost like usually you kind of see a freshman pair up with a junior, they kind of end up being really good friends, or that process kind of happens. Now it's like the freshmen come in, and that's the freshman block, and they've stuck together. Have you seen the same thing?
So, um, per team, like I'll say, speaking to like one of my programs, I've seen that like that barrier. I think early on, like yes, that like that kind of like, oh, these are the freshmen, like I'm gonna hang out with the freshmen. I think that happened more frequently, and then as the year had gone on, um, we had a lot of younger people playing for our team. And so because of that gap, a lot of the communication happened from like your fourth year senior, your fifth year senior to like a freshman, and so they had to learn to work with each other. And so now it's kind of like bled into their social life. It's like now we have freshmen who hang out with juniors, we have juniors who hang out with sophomores. Like we have like virtually like no beef, like it's everybody's good for the most part visually, right? Um, I think it also, yeah, like, and one of my other teams is just like generally like run super young, right? Like, um, we brought in a lot of young people. And so, for my other program, like it just happened that like, yeah, like all the freshmen kind of hang out with each other. So I get what you mean. Like, I
Yeah.
think like they're a little bit more, like reserved, you know?
Oh, I've just resorted to just throwing him immediately with a senior in the weight room. Like there's just, ultimately, if the senior ever complains, I'm like, yeah, it's just a couple extra plates you're gonna have to change out. It's not a big deal. We're all doing the same thing, So you're gonna
Yeah.
be stuck with them. Yeah,
So it's like it's actually that brings up an interesting point. Like, I mean, I don't know what kind of assessments you do with your team when they come in, but something that I'm looking to start to try to implement is sending out some kind of personality test
mm,
going into when I start working with them, right? So that I have an idea of like what I'm getting myself into and how they interact with other people and how I can bridge that gap, right?
yeah,
Like I think, I try to have like a lot of my assessments now geared towards having like a lower skill barrier and more of like it's easier to see progress in an assessment when the skill of the assessment is super low. So it's like you can just kind of go. But I think that's something that I'm considering adding in this whole approach of like holistic sports performance, right? Like, all right, like if your dynamic with the upperclassmen is like I know going to be like this, like as in like there's going like I see conflict about to happen,
yeah.
like then I know how to like have conversations with that person so that they're better equipped to be able to handle um like these relationships.
So, kind of, what styles of coaching each player would handle the best?
Yeah, yeah, I think like to some people like I used to work with track and field here, and like track and field athletes like for some reason love when they're just like the harshest criticism
Yeah,
like in the world. Like that's just like what my group responded to at the time. I like somebody would do a clean and it was like kind of lazy, and then I'd tell them, hey, that was a lazy clean, and throw in some colorful language in there, and then the next set of cleans just dialed, and that's just like what they responded to. Um, and other people like want to sit down and have conversations, want to have a cup of coffee, and like I can do all that,
yeah.
right? Um, but yeah, like how they respond to coaching styles, but then also how they respond like how do they interject themselves into like the social piece of the team? Because
Mm,
I think like if you don't get along as a team, I mean, people can win despite not getting along, because if your skill, right? Like if you're good, you're good. But you know, in a team sport, chemistry kind of goes a long way.
yeah.
It does go a long way.
It certainly does. And, I love those personality assessments. Obviously, with the sports psych background, like those things really matter to me, right? Excuse me. But where I've seen it fall short is I've done so many of those assessments, and then the coaches will, it's almost always the sport coach's side, right? But they'll like throw those things away like immediately, and so
Yeah.
we've done them with the team, and then it's just like, okay, this person's this specific personality, they react to criticism this way, they're most likely to get along with X members on the team, and it's like, okay, great, and then we get to our first practice, and all of a sudden it completely unravels, and then they're not paying attention to it anymore. But with somebody who has like intentionality piece like you do, I think those can be a game changer, honestly. Uh, and the really, really interesting aspect to me behind that, right, is I think good coaches do those things naturally. They see how to coach athletes and then adjust based off of each specific athlete. I think that they can understand the team dynamics naturally, but it takes time. It takes a couple months. It takes some failures. It takes sometimes where I think somebody wants me to scream at them and get them motivated, and they actually hate that more than anything. Those are lessons you have to learn. And so ultimately, with those questionnaires, what I think the appealing piece is can you cut down the amount of time that it's going to take to do those things? Can you maybe get an extra month of better quality training out of it because you know how to coach those athletes, especially in a world like today's with the transfer portal, where in basketball specifically, I've been talking about this with other basketball strength coaches. It's not anymore going to be about who are the best coaches at developing players over 2, 3 years. It's going to be who's the best at developing a player over the summer, getting him ready to play basketball. Because ultimately, especially in our situation, in somewhere like UMass Lowell, which is a great basketball school as well, somebody's going to come from a JUCO, spend a year at either of our schools, and then if they do well, they're going to have the immediate opportunity to go to a Power Five program. And so ultimately, our kind of strength and conditioning is going to be based around who can really prep them in a year and get them ready to play within a year. So maybe you can buy back even a couple weeks, which will be crucial because ultimately it's 2 out of 52 that you potentially get with an athlete, even less if they're coming in over the summer. So I really like that idea. I think that can kind of accelerate the process.
Yeah, I think for me, like I'm always thinking about the mental component in addition to the physical because in my like the way that I think about things, it's like, all right, like how can we best how can I best install like this technical model with like the program that I have? And I have failed at times where I feel like, or I'll say I feel like I failed, where like I had a program and like I thought like X's and O's Y's is like what's appropriate, and then like I thought the quality of training throughout like the block was like I'd say like average. Um, and like part of that is on me, like like I have to drive intent better, and then like later on when I got to know the team a lot better and got to know what like makes them tick, it's like at the last training block that we had together, it's probably the most dialed training block that we've ever had. Like we trained really really hard. Like there are moments where like yeah the energy was really high and all that, but like less like chatter, less like side stuff, and just like full on just like training. And then they woke up, it's like 60 minutes went by and it's like super dialed. I think that's because like I knew what made them tick better than when I first received that group. And it was like, I don't really know what you respond to. Here's the deal. And like, we're going to kind of go from there. So,
Yeah.
um, but yeah, like I couldn't imagine, like I am kind of in that situation with like, again, like transfer portal, like you get an athlete and you might have a year, right? Hopefully you have multiple, but like you might not. And it is kind of what it is. And so that's, I agree. Like there has to be some value in accelerating the psychosocial component of training so that you can get to like the technical pieces faster.
Mm. I agree. Just it's just this year really opened my eyes to it, right? And I think it's success for mid majors is almost going to be the Achilles heel from this point on, right? Because the better you do, the more exposure your players are going to get, the better opportunity that they have, right? So, we had two first team all Sun Belt players, and then one of them graduated, and the other one's going to a Power Five program now. And so ultimately, all the conversations I had with that person were like, man, I can't wait for next summer because we've already put on 15 pounds, really quality weight. You're moving really well. Let's see if we can push another 10 this next year, and it's really going to help you out. And then, of course, we get to transfer portal time, and all of a sudden he's stopping by my office and giving me the official, I've entered my name in the transfer portal. And it's, obviously it sucks as a coach because you get excited about it. And because you feel like you hit that stride in that time, right? And it's like, okay, now I really know how to coach you. So ultimately, can you accelerate that process? Can you make it easier to get it done earlier so that, potentially even could you retain somebody a little bit better? Could you give them a better quality experience? And could you kind of entertain the idea of them staying for another year if you can make their situation work? I think it's a really good idea.
It's like it's hard because it's like you're always recruiting,
Yeah.
and that to some extent is a little bit exhausting. Um, but like it's I think part of the game, especially in working with basketball. Um, I work with basketball and women's basketball and field hockey right now, and it's like it. I've seen it a little bit less in the like field sport realm where we're at. But like for basketball, like this year we had pretty like we of the people who are returning, there was a potential I think like potential 10 returning, and like we're returning 9, and I was like, hey,
Yeah.
like we
It's
did
a
all
win.
right. Like that's
Yeah.
a win. So
It's a huge win, man. Yeah. I think we had, I don't even remember. I was training three guys at the end of the semester. That's all I know. So,
yeah, it's like, hey,
yeah.
what are we doing here? Like,
Yeah. Which is great individual training, but obviously I'd
yeah,
love to have some of those guys kind of stay back. But
yeah.
the final question I have for you, and I think is just a really cool thing about what you do outside of coaching. What's the importance of fitness in your life, and then also kind of doing it through different avenues, right? So Olympic lifting, yoga, instructing, and your own practice, and then marathon running. What's the importance of fitness for you outside of coaching?
I mean, for me, I'm a big believer, and I know you just said outside of coaching, but like it's like part of it is like practice what you preach.
Yeah,
Um, like I'm not saying like all my athletes have to run a marathon, like that's insane. But like to some extent, like I think it's important to be able to like show like how you lead is like what you present, right? Like how you present yourself, like the way that you carry yourself, the training you do, like part of that like bleeds into like how you are as a coach. But personally, like I think um, for me, it's how I just like take care of my mental health, and I think it's a lot of that's I think a lot of strength coaches can kind of resonate to this. It's like um, sometimes like the training is more to take care of yourself than uh, like it is to like enhance like striving for things. Um, and granted, like I'm getting better at learning. I guess I'll speak to myself. Like I think I'm getting better at learning how to take care of myself in more ways than just like fitness.
mm,
Because like stress is stress. Like I had a graduate professor, we were talking and I was like super stressed out and I was like, hey, like, she goes, how do you take care of yourself? And I was like, and I was about to start talking. She's like, besides lifting weights. And I was like,
yep.
don't really know. So I think for me, like, it's part of it. It's not all of it, but I think like, I really like doing really difficult things.
Yeah,
Like, I really like, I'm kind of an extremist when it comes to that. Like, if I'm doing Olympic lifting, like, well, I have aspirations of going to nationals.
yep.
Like, if I am running for whatever reason, now I'm doing a marathon, right? Like, so for me, like, I kind of bleed into like the extreme versions of all this because like I really enjoy the challenge of doing
Mm.
really difficult things. And I think you get to know yourself really well in those moments. But still working on trying to be able to figure out what other things help me like take care of myself instead of just like training,
Yeah.
right? So
No, it's incredibly valuable. So your recent marathon, was that your first ever marathon?
Yes.
And
So
when did you
I
run that?
ran where?
When you win?
Oh, when literally the day before I saw you at CSCA.
Well, you were moving pretty well.
Yeah, I was well, I wasn't for a while. I think it was like that was like just the couple hours after I started to feel good. Like
Yeah.
I like couldn't bend my legs. Like this is like the worst feeling in the world.
It's awful. What was the worst mile for you?
So it's a very, very specific moment at like mile 11 and a half. So the Pittsburgh Marathon, it runs with the half marathon. And so for a while, you have all these people, you're riding the energy of like the other people around you. And at mile 11 and a half, the half marathon goes this way, like to the left, and then the full marathon goes to the right. And you realize the decision you make, like when you're on the right side,
Yeah.
because it's a bridge, right? So it's a bridge, and so you can see the left side of the bridge, and everybody's like, la di da di da, like I'm gonna finish this half marathon, and then there's the five people in front of you in the full marathon who are like, oh, this is very real. You get off the bridge, mile 12 to 13, there's an incline. It's like if you maxed out a treadmill.
Mm.
Like if you had maxed out the incline on a treadmill and you had done that for half a mile,
Uh,
and that was the worst mile like that I think I had ever experienced. And this guy, he's like running next to me. He was like, "This is my 30th marathon. I just want to give you a heads up. Like this hill is no joke. Like you know about the hill." And I was like, "I do now." Uh, and we just like waddled up this hill, and I was like, "Oh shoot!" Like he was not lying to me, and I proceeded to cramp in my
oh,
calves and my hamstrings and my quads for another 10 miles.
no shot, dude. Oh man, I'll never forget. I hate that they do combined marathons, half marathons, and this one had a freaking 5K, the one I ran. So it was like all uphill, for the first half marathon. And so I'm like, all right, dude, I'm walking the uphills because this is getting ridiculous. And so the half marathon ends up catching up to us, and then there's a group that did the 5K. So the 5K like finishes up, and it's exactly the same point. So you come back and you're at 13.1, right? And so then now it's all right. Marathon goes and splits off and goes to a different section, and then half marathon and 5K is finishing up in this specific area. And so you had blue bibs, red bibs, and green bibs. And blue was full marathon, which my number was 69, by the way, which was awesome. And then half marathon was red, and then 5K was green. Dude, this freaking guy in a 5K, I've never hated a man more in my life. I finish up the 13.1 and go left just like you did. And then he's like, as I'm going right before the line for the finish line for the half marathon, he's like, dude, come on. He's like, you got it. Only point one left. Only point one left. And because he thought I was running the half marathon, whatever, wearing his freaking 5K bib, and he's like, I did it, man. You can do it too. Like, no joke. And I was like, get the hell out of here. Like, I will steer. I'll stop this race just to fight you because you have no clue. I've got 13.1 left after this, and then now I just got beat into the dirt, man. That was awful that last half, but you finish it, like you said, pushing yourself to those limits is really fun experience. When you finish it, you don't feel great, but then after like a little bit, you kind of time you get to recuperate, you end up feeling a lot better about it. And it's always a really cool situation.
It's funny because like one of my friends, you remember Hannah Burns, right?
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
From yeah. So she lives in Pittsburgh, and so I was staying with her for this marathon, and like I had seen her like 8 miles in, and this is when I'm still like, hey, yeah, like let's
Yeah.
go. Like I'm like I'm not even breathing out of my mouth yet. Like I'm just like, I'm crushing this, and like I see her at mile 7 or 8 or whatever. She has a little sign, and then I see her again after that hill, and I was like, I, like just lack of words, just
Yeah,
no
I'm not.
words. Like I'm not doing
I'm
well.
not doing good, man.
And then apparently I had seen her at one point at mile like 18, and I just like don't remember that.
Yeah.
And then I saw her at the finish line, but like apparently there was like two more times between like 18 and like 23 that she like I like saw her. I'll
Yeah.
say in quotation marks, and I like just blacked out.
Yep.
Um, So yeah, like that last half of the marathon, I don't think people are meant for that. Or at least me, like I'm like 70% torso, like 30% leg, and like all my muscles in my quads. So like I I do not have the morphology
Yeah.
that makes me a good runner.
Yep.
None
Yeah,
of that.
I ran at mine at 265. Just not fun, and
Oh, that's
yeah, my, I'll never I had a heart rate tracker on, and I was like, "Alright, I'll keep it at 155 for the race," and then it'll creep up towards the end, obviously, and then I got to, like, mile 15, and I was running at like 185 and so like I literally tried to slow it down as much as possible and it like still kept going up and so the last like 10 miles was at like 192 like for the remainder of the race and that's where I knew it was bad. It was getting really really bad. It was getting out of control. So I'm glad I finished it. That's a one I'm gonna hang my hat on being a marathon runner one time and then I'm good after that.
yeah, it's because yeah, I'm not gonna lie, I was kind of worried a couple of days afterwards. I was like, I don't know how long it's gonna take for my body to feel normal,
Yeah.
but I did something. I did something, and I went straight to CSCCA, and like, I mean, I'm not gonna elaborate, but like, you know,
Yeah.
you spend a lot of time with other people and on your feet, and like,
It's not the recovery zone.
it's not like you're horizontal the whole day, like it's
Exactly.
not the recovery zone. That's a good PG way of saying that.
Yeah, exactly. Everybody listening is aware though. So, well, Merv, thank you for coming on, dude. I really appreciate it. It was
Yeah.
great to catch up with you, and then I know our listeners appreciated hearing you too. Is if anybody wanted to follow you on social media, what would be a good way to do that?
So Instagram is the most active social media platform I'm at. It's the Merv Lumba, so TheMervLumba. That's like the main place. That anybody has questions, like I check like DMs pretty often, all that. So that's the main place. Not on Facebook, not on Twitter. Um, Main place.
Boom. There we go. Well, thank you, Merv. I appreciate you, man.
Yeah, appreciate you.
Absolutely.